Hello, this is Howard Rheingold. I taught at Berkeley and Stanford from 2005 to 2015 using what are now called social media to teach about issues around social media. And I thought it would be useful right now to talk about my journey. Of course, I chose to use social media. Now so many teachers are being forced to teach online. So a lot of what I learned might be helpful to you. As I said, my experience was with college students. And I also taught a purely online course called Rheingold U that had a wide range of ages, people in different countries. And it's, as far as I know, what I'm saying pertains to higher education, but it could well be applied to high school level as well. And I don't really claim any expertise at levels lower than that. I want to emphasize that I'm talking about technology, but it's in a context of a certain kind of pedagogy, and that you could do this face-to-face with whiteboards and Post-its and index cards. But if you're teaching online, I want to try to distinguish among some of the tools that you can use and what I use them for. Two things I learned is it's important to trust students. For every slacker and cheater that you catch by not trusting them, you've given the message to the rest of the students, 10 or 50 of them for every slacker, that you don't trust them. I also learned that when I confessed that I was learning to teach while I was teaching them, and that I welcomed their feedback, that we got into a kind of trusted feedback loop that I ended up calling co-learning. Others have called this a new culture of learning. There's a book of that name by Douglas Thomas and John Seeley Brown that I recommend. And very quickly, the characteristics of the kind of learning they're talking about is that's learner-centered. And of course, most of these you can do without technology. Self-directed, social and peer-to-peer, inquiry-based, collaborative, and cooperative. And I distinguish those by collaborative being working together on projects, and cooperative being helping each other learn. Networked, and then this is what my first classroom looked like at UC Berkeley, and there were some changes in the classroom I'll talk about a little bit later. So I started out by using a forum from one vendor and a blog application from another vendor and a wiki from another vendor, and the students complained quite correctly that these all had separate logins and separate user interfaces. So I entered a competition and won a small award that I used to pay a developer to create what I call the social media classroom. And you'll see these colored tabs at the top of the page. By clicking on wiki, you go to the wiki. By clicking on forums, you go to the forums. So you can switch back and forth very easily within a single web page. So this is the forum, and I think of the forum as a place for the voice of the group. You have a face-to-face conversation, and then the bell rings. Well, you can continue that in the face-to-face world online. If you're doing it purely online, this is really the place where you and your learners decide what it is you want to continue to discuss from your syllabus and from their interests. There's also blogs. If the forum is the voice of the group, then the blog is really the voice of the individual. And I think using these both together gives an opportunity for people to explore the subject as a class and to reflect on their own learning personally and to talk to each other about their reflections. We also used a wiki. There are other collaborative writing apps, like Google Docs is one that probably most students know. And I'll talk about an application we used for collaborative learning a little later. We also used social bookmarks, which was built into the social media classroom. But of course, there's a social bookmarking service like Diigo that enables you to do that and to create a group. You could create a group for your classroom in Diigo and bookmark things for each other. And you can also highlight and leave sticky notes. There are a lot of different tools that you can use. Another one that's newer is Hypothesis that you can use for group annotation. And I think any of these tools can be useful if the students take to it. And there's, I think, some advantage to trying out a number of them and seeing which work the best. That's what I did. So this is how it started out. And two changes happened that radically changed the way we taught. One was we moved the chairs in a circle. And another thing that came from our co-learning experience was that the students themselves started helping me teach. We selected teams of 3 students, and they would come up with a plan, and I would consult with them, and they would lead about a third of the class, and found that they were enthusiastic about it. There's nothing like teaching something to learn it, but also the experience of standing up and trying to maintain the attention of all the other students in the face of the entire internet at their fingertips is a good experience for students to have. So one of the things we used the wiki for was the lexicon. One of the things that the co-teaching teams did was that they identified words and phrases from the texts, from my lectures, from our discussions, and they put them on a wiki page. And then the entire class, including myself and the co-teaching team, would fill out the definitions, kind of the way Wikipedia works. And at the end of the term, we had quite a useful lexicon. I also asked them to make mind maps. That was one of the things that each co-teaching team, and I like mind maps because they're visual, because they're lateral, because they show connections between things. So just quickly, you don't have to have a fancy application to do it. You can do it with pen and paper and take a photograph. And you can see students came up with a lot of different ways to mind map what we had been talking about. I also presented the material in a number of different ways. So I presented the syllabus as a wiki. I also made it as a concept map. All of these are clickable here. And also as a Prezi. And then, as I mentioned, aside from my teaching at Berkeley and Stanford, I also taught a course online that I called Rheingold U. So I experimented a lot and learned a great deal about how to use these things. We also had live video conference sessions. So this is a screenshot from Blackboard Collaborate. This is years before Zoom was available, and I'm recording this in an app called Big Blue Button that I think is very useful for learning as well. I discovered, and I think this is really useful at whatever level you are teaching, if you are teaching through video conference, instead of talking at the students, why not include them as active participants? So we came up with roles together, and 2 or 3 people would volunteer to be searchers who would search for useful resources that were relevant to what we were talking about, and they would put the URLs in the text chat. And then there were contextualizers who would take those URLs and write 1 or 2 or 3 lines describing them. Summarizers who would summarize the text chat that acted as a back channel while we were speaking on video. Then there would be the curators who would take the summaries and contextualized URLs and the link to the mind maps and the lexicon and create a wiki page so that each live session had a wiki page with all that information that people could go back to, or people who missed it could look at. There was a Lexicon team and a mind mapping team as well. And I encouraged learners to take different roles every time. We would often do mind maps together online, and there are a number of shared whiteboards that enable you to do that. And my favorite was a shared whiteboard that Blackboard Collaborate had, in which people could participate anonymously. So you would just see things appearing on the page and moving around. And I used it in my very first session, and it really works to kind of give people the understanding that they can act online collectively as a kind of collective intelligence. Well, I began to do my own online teaching when I saw around, gee whiz, it was around 2010, there were more and more websites popping up for people to learn from without school. So I asked myself, what's next? I gave a lecture at UC Berkeley in which I talked at greater length about my journey, and then I talked about what might it be like if we eliminated the teacher entirely. What if a group of learners want to learn a particular subject and none of them is an expert in that subject? How do you find and qualify and organize resources? How do you teach each other? We had some face-to-face sessions at the Berkeley Center for New Media with graduate students and teachers. We had online forums in between those sessions. And I had my laptop at the session and had a video conference open. And what happened was that educators from around the world began to participate. And eventually we decided on a number of online media and created a PureGaji handbook, PureGaji being the word that we came up for peer learning. And we're really kind of an example of what we were talking about, in the sense that that we learned which media to use and what roles to take and how to do it. And in fact, if you go to puregaji.org, you will find a free peer-to-peer learning handbook. I kind of stepped back from this group after 2 years, but since then they have organized quite effectively a community of educators from US, Mexico, Germany, Japan, Brazil, and they're, I think, on the 5th revision of the handbook, and they welcome any educators who want to join them. I learned in the last years of my teaching college students what's called open learning. The first example of that was something called DS-106, DS standing for digital storytelling, in which they created blogs for each student, and then they created a hub using WordPress that syndicated all of the blog posts together. And they also created filters so that students could only interact with those in their course, or they could interact with students who had taken the course before. And it was also open to anybody in the world. So you could choose who you wanted to learn with. So I changed my teaching and asked my students before our first meeting to use a very useful service called Reclaim Hosting, that for $25 would give them a domain name and access to their own Slices server for a year. And they would be able to install and configure their own WordPress. It's not just about expressing yourselves. It's about learning how to be your own publisher, not rely on Facebook as being the only way to publish. So each student had a blog, and then we had, they had their individual blogs, which they could continue to use after the course. We used MediaWiki as well, and for a forum, we used Discourse, which is, I recommend, discourse.org. The result of that was that students began taking more and more responsibility. I wish I had the nerve or the knowledge earlier to do what I did toward the very end. The last time I taught a course at Stanford, after our second meeting, and the students knew what was involved and had already been involved in the forum and the blogs and the wiki and all of the instruments that I've described to you. I wrote on the whiteboard everything that was required of them: the blog posts, the forum posts, the collaborative writing, the co-teaching, the lexicon, and then I wrote my phone number on the board, and I said, I'm going to leave, and you're going to figure out how you would like to take this course and correct my syllabus on the whiteboard. You can text me if you have questions, and when you're finished, let me know, and I'll come back. And I did come back, and they had changed it all around, and we worked with that for the rest of the quarter, and it worked pretty well. In an ideal world, I would meet with learners for a week or two before we began, and we would co-create the syllabus together. Kathy Davidson, when she was teaching courses at Duke, was quite successful with doing that. So I guess in closing, I would say it's important to let the students know that we've all been thrown into this circumstance together, and we're all learning how to do it together, and that you as the teacher value their input about what works and what doesn't work, and also to give the students more and more responsibility for their learning and reflecting on their learning in public. And in the end, instead of having a final exam, what I did was ask them to take the blog posts and the forum posts and the wiki work and the co-teaching that they had done during the term and create some kind of document in any medium that told the story of what they had learned about the subject. And I found that to be amazingly creative. It really cut loose their creativity. So again, to recap, there are a lot of different technologies. A lot of teachers are just using Zoom or other video conferencing and presenting lectures. I learned not to lecture for more than 5 or 10 minutes at a time before taking a break and having conversations. And it's really distancing to just look at your screen and listen for hours at a time. Have your students participate. Enlist them in helping you come up with new ways to participate. Experiment. You do have a certain amount of material that you need to get across, but there are a lot of different ways to do that. And in my experience, mixing asynchronous media, such as blogs and forums, with synchronous media, such as video conferencing, often with a text back channel, really works a lot better than keeping it strictly synchronous. So if you want to learn more, I've got a lot of material at Rheingold.com. There's a tab that says Learning. I have more than 100 interviews with innovators in digital media and learning. I'm also on Twitter and Patreon. So I welcome any questions that you might have about this. Good luck and have fun.